I never thought my work as a seed bank curator would matter in the apocalypse, but when the dead started walking, my knowledge of plants became our salvation. I'm Dario Calloway, and this is how I survived the first month of the zombie outbreak. With nothing but agricultural expertise and a collection of rare seeds, the plants that once fed humanity might now save it. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Dario Calloway, though most people who knew me before all this called me Roots. I worked as a botanical anthropologist at the Southern Heritage Seed Preservation Project, where I specialized in preserving heirloom and indigenous crop varieties. My life's work was finding, cataloging, and protecting seeds that corporate agriculture had deemed unprofitable or obsolete. I spent 20 years traveling to remote communities, learning from elders about plants that had fed their ancestors for generations. Not exactly the background you'd expect for surviving the zombie apocalypse, right? But here we are. I grew up in rural Georgia, raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Grandma Rose was the daughter of sharecroppers and knew every plant that grew in the soil for 50 miles around. She could tell you which mushrooms would feed you and which would kill you, which herbs would bring down a fever, and which berries would give you the runs for a week. While other kids played video games, I followed her through forests and abandoned fields, learning the old ways. She used to tell me, "Plants are patient, Dario. They've been here longer than us, and they'll be here long after we're gone. Learn their language, and you'll never go hungry." I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would be. I got my doctorate in botanical anthropology, focusing on traditional agricultural techniques. Most of academia thought I was wasting my time studying what they called primitive farming methods. Why bother with crop rotation and companion planting when we had chemical fertilizers? Why save seeds when you could buy new ones every year? I heard it all, but I kept working, convinced that the old knowledge still mattered. The Southern Heritage Seed Preservation Project hired me 15 years ago to build their collection. We maintained a seed bank housing over 3,000 varieties of vegetables, grains, fruits, and medicinal plants, most of them no longer commercially available. Seeds that could grow without pesticides, seeds that could survive drought, seeds that contained medicinal properties forgotten by modern medicine. I didn't just store seeds, I studied them, grew them, documented their properties. I became obsessed with understanding how these plants had co-evolved with human civilizations over thousands of years. That obsession earned me my nickname, Roots, because colleagues said I was more connected to the earth than to people. They weren't entirely wrong. I preferred plants to most humans. Plants don't lie or betray you. They're straightforward. Give them what they need, and they'll grow. Treat them poorly, and they die. Simple cause and effect. This fixation on my work cost me my marriage. Angela left after 7 years, saying she was married to a man who cared more about extinct bean varieties than starting a family. She wasn't entirely wrong either. 4 years ago, I lost the pinky finger on my left hand while liberating rare seed varieties from Agrinova Corporation's research facility. They were patenting traditional crop varieties that indigenous communities had developed over centuries, effectively making it illegal for farmers to grow their own ancestral foods without paying royalties. I couldn't stand for that. The security guard who caught me wasn't supposed to be armed, but corporate policies about such things tend to be flexible when no one's watching. The finger was a small price to pay. I escaped with 17 varieties of drought-resistant corn that dated back to pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, seeds that might now help keep us alive. I was at our rural research farm when the first reports about the outbreak hit the news. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring, planting season. We had seedlings started in the greenhouse, hundreds of varieties we were propagating for distribution to community gardens and small-scale farmers. The initial reports called it a concerning outbreak of an aggressive flu variant in major cities. Nothing we hadn't heard before. But something else was happening that few people noticed. In our research greenhouse, we'd been monitoring unusual behaviors in certain plant specimens, accelerated growth rates, abnormal cellular structures, plants responding to stimuli in ways I'd never seen before. I'd sent samples to colleagues at the CDC the week before but hadn't heard back. Later, I would understand why. While my colleagues watched news reports with mild concern, I was already packing. Not because I understood what was coming. I didn't, not really, but because I've always been cautious. When you work with endangered plant species, you develop a certain mindset. You're always preparing for catastrophe, always thinking about preservation and continuity. I remember Dr. Elijah Williams, the project director, finding me in the seed storage room, methodically packing specimens into my custom-designed portable seed bank, essentially a reinforced, climate-controlled case with hundreds of compartments for different varieties. "Bit of an overreaction, don't you think, Roots?" he said, watching me work. I didn't look up. "The CDC isn't returning my calls about those anomalous samples." "It's flu season, they're busy." "It's not flu season, and those plants shouldn't be behaving the way they are." He sighed. "What do abnormal cucumber seedlings have to do with a viral outbreak in humans?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but something isn't right." 24 hours later, the emergency broadcasts began. 48 hours later, the broadcast stopped altogether. Dr. Williams called me from Atlanta as the city was being evacuated. The connection was bad, breaking up every few seconds, but I'll never forget his last words to me. "Protect the collection. Roots. Whatever happens, those seeds might be all that's left." The call dropped. I never heard from him again. By then, I had loaded my truck with everything essential: the seed bank, cultivation tools, reference books, propagation materials, and basic survival supplies. I'd been camping enough to have decent gear on hand: a tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, water filtration system. Not enough for a prolonged crisis, but enough to get me somewhere safer. I was on the road when I saw my first infected person. I'd stopped for gas at a small station about 40 miles from the research farm. People were panicking, filling multiple containers, arguing over who was next in line. That's when a sedan came speeding into the lot, crashing into one of the pumps. The driver's door opened and a man stumbled out. At first I thought he was injured from the crash. He was covered in blood, moving strangely. But then he lunged at the nearest person, a woman who'd been filling gas cans. The speed was inhuman, the strength too. He tore into her neck like an animal. The screaming started. People ran. I got back in my truck and drove, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. That first night, I slept in the cab of my truck on a Forest Service road, listening to increasingly desperate emergency broadcasts. The government was advising people to evacuate major cities, to avoid contact with infected individuals, to report to designated safe zones. But there was a tone in the announcer's voice that told me the authorities were already losing control. By morning, the broadcasts were acknowledging that the infected were attacking others, spreading the disease through bites or exposure to bodily fluids. By afternoon, they were admitting that the infected could only be stopped by destroying the brain. By evening, the official broadcasts had been replaced by a loop of pre-recorded emergency instructions. By midnight, there was nothing but static. For the next 2 weeks, I moved constantly, avoiding populated areas, scavenging what I could from abandoned rural properties. I stayed away from the designated safe zones. My instincts told me that concentrating people would only make the spread worse. I was right. Every safe zone I passed had either been overrun or abandoned. I kept moving until my fuel was dangerously low. That's when I found the garden center, just off Highway 19. It had been looted already, the cash registers smashed, most of the packaged food gone, but the looters hadn't been gardeners. They'd left behind everything useful: seeds, tools, fertilizer, irrigation equipment. The structure was perfect for my needs: concrete block construction with limited windows at ground level. The greenhouse sections had broken glass, but the frames were intact. There was a loading dock in back with heavy roll-up doors, a small office with a bathroom and roof access via an interior ladder. Most importantly, there was a deep well on the property with a hand pump for irrigation purposes. I spent 3 days securing the location. I blocked the broken windows with shelving units, reinforced the doors with whatever heavy materials I could find, and set up simple alarm systems using garden tools and fishing line. I cleared the most intact greenhouse section and started planting the fastest growing crop varieties I had: radishes, certain lettuces, pea shoots, microgreens, foods that could provide nutrition within weeks rather than months. The garden center became my sanctuary, but I knew from the beginning it wouldn't last. Nothing lasts in this world now. I've learned to approach each day with the same philosophy I applied to endangered plant species. Document everything, preserve what's essential, and always plan for catastrophe. About 2 weeks after establishing my sanctuary, I noticed something disturbing. The infected who wandered near the garden center were changing. I would watch them through binoculars from the roof, documenting their behavior patterns. At first, it was the typical mindless wandering we've all come to expect. But gradually, certain infected began showing what I can only describe as purposeful movement. They would stop near specific plants, seeming almost to interact with them. More alarming were the physical changes. Some of the infected had developed what looked like fungal growths emerging from their wounds. Their skin had taken on a greenish tint in patches. I started finding unusual plant growth in areas where the infected had congregated, accelerated, abnormal growth similar to what I'd observed in our research greenhouse before everything collapsed. I kept detailed notes drawing connections between my pre-collapse research and what I was witnessing now. I began to develop a theory, but I needed more information. That led me to risk a supply run to a nearby housing development, where I'd seen signs of what might have been a home office in one of the abandoned houses. That's where I found the journal. It was partially eaten, the pages stained with blood, but what remained was enough to send a chill through me. It belonged to Dr. Marcus Chen, a researcher I'd met at conferences who specialized in plant-based pharmaceuticals. His final entries described a classified research project combining plant genetics with human stem cells, aiming to create enhanced medicinal compounds. Something had gone very wrong with that research. The final readable entry simply said, "It's spreading through both kingdoms now. God help us all." I was still processing this discovery when I spotted them through the window, a woman and 5 teenagers running from a group of infected. They were moving smartly, staying together, but they were clearly exhausted and running out of options. The infected were about to cut off their escape route. Without really thinking it through, I created a diversion. I had brought a packet of seed-starting soil, and I threw it in the opposite direction, the impact against a car setting off its alarm. The infected changed course immediately, giving the group a chance to slip away. I didn't expect them to spot me watching from the window. I didn't expect the woman to make deliberate eye contact and gesture questioningly toward the garden center. And I certainly didn't expect to find myself 2 hours later, sharing my sanctuary with 6 strangers. The woman's name was Melissa Parker, a high school biology teacher. The 5 teenagers, Jake, Maya, Zoe, Tyler, and Devin, were students who had been on a field trip with her when the outbreak hit their town. They'd been surviving together ever since, moving from place to place as each became compromised. They were hungry, exhausted, and traumatized by what they'd seen. But they were also smart, observant, and willing to learn. Melissa had kept them alive through sheer determination and quick thinking, but they had been running dangerously low on supplies. That first night, as they ate the fresh vegetables I'd managed to grow, I found myself explaining the principles of sustainable agriculture, showing them how to tell edible plants from toxic lookalikes, demonstrating how to set up simple hydroponic systems using broken aquariums I'd found in the garden center's pet section. Maya, the quietest of the students, asked surprisingly specific questions about my seed collection. At the time, I thought she was just more interested in botany than the others. I didn't realize the significance of her curiosity until much later. For the next week, we fell into a routine. I would teach them about plant identification and cultivation during the day. They would help maintain our growing systems and strengthen our defenses. At night, we would take turns keeping watch from the roof, documenting the movements of the infected in the area. That's when we began to notice the horde forming. At first, it was just a slight increase in the number of infected wandering nearby. Then dozens, gathering in a field about half a mile away. Then hundreds, moving with that strange coordination I'd observed in smaller groups. On the 8th day after the survivors joined me, the horde surrounded our sanctuary. We huddled inside, watching through cracks in the barricades, hardly daring to breathe. And that's when I saw with absolute certainty what I had only theorized before. The infected were changing, evolving, becoming something that was neither fully human nor fully plant, but a horrifying combination of both. And somehow, I suspected that my specialized knowledge, the very expertise that had been mocked as obsolete in our technology-driven world, might be the key to understanding what was happening. As we sat in terrified silence that night, I realized that the seeds I carried weren't just the past of human agriculture. They might well be the future of human survival. I spent the first 2 weeks after the collapse alone in that garden center, learning how to survive in this new world. Finding it was pure luck. I was nearly out of fuel, desperate for a secure location when I spotted it just off Highway 19. From the outside, it didn't look promising. The front windows were smashed, and the parking lot was littered with abandoned vehicles. But something made me stop and investigate. The garden center had been a family-owned business called Green Thumb Nursery, according to the sign out front. Not one of those big box stores, but a proper plant nursery with greenhouse facilities and a substantial inventory. The looters had already come and gone, taking cash and consumer goods but leaving behind everything that would actually keep someone alive. Typical. My first priority was assessing the structure itself. The main building was concrete block construction with a metal roof, solid and defensible. The greenhouse sections had broken glass panels, but the metal frameworks remained intact. There was a loading dock in back with roll-up doors, a staff, area with a bathroom, and most importantly, access to water via a deep well with a hand pump that had been used for irrigation. I secured the perimeter methodically, starting with the most vulnerable points. The broken front windows were my biggest concern. I dragged heavy metal shelving units from the back and positioned them to block the openings, then reinforced them with bags of soil and mulch. For the intact windows, I applied strips of duct tape in grid patterns to prevent shattering if something, or someone, tried to break through. The doors were next. The main entrance had glass panels that I covered with plywood from the garden center's potting bench. The back loading dock doors were sturdy metal, but I still blocked them with heavy equipment and created noise traps that would alert me if anything tried to force entry. After 3 days of non-stop work, I had transformed the garden center into something resembling a fortress. Not impenetrable by any means, but secure enough to allow me a few hours of sleep without constant vigilance. My next priority was water and food. The hand pump on the property was a godsend. Clean groundwater that didn't require filtration. I filled every container I could find and set up a rainwater collection system using plastic sheeting from the greenhouse and large planting containers. For food, I immediately began planting in the most intact section of the greenhouse. I selected varieties from my seed bank that would provide quick yields, radishes that would be ready in 3 weeks, certain lettuce varieties, pea shoots, microgreens. I also planted medicinal herbs, feverfew, echinacea, yarrow, knowing that conventional medicine would soon be unavailable. The garden center still had a stock of fertilizers and growing mediums, including organic compost. I inventoried everything, calculating how long the supplies would last if carefully rationed. The answer wasn't encouraging, but it was better than nothing. I also found tools, not just gardening implements, but basic carpentry tools that could be used for construction or, if necessary, defense. I kept a hand cultivator with 3 sharp metal prongs within reach at all times. Not ideal as a weapon, but better than nothing if the infected breached my defenses. Within a week, I had established what felt like a sustainable system. My days fell into a routine. Check and reinforce defenses at dawn, tend to the growing, plants through the morning, scout the immediate area at midday, forage in the afternoon, and then keep watch from the roof in the evening, before allowing myself a few hours of fitful sleep. From my rooftop vantage point, I could observe the infected wandering the suburban landscape. Their numbers were growing. In the beginning, I might see 3 or 4 per day. By the end of the second week, I was counting dozens within visual range at any given time. More concerning than their increasing numbers were the changes I was beginning to observe in them. The infected closest to the garden center were developing unusual characteristics. Their movements seemed more purposeful than the typical shambling gait. Some would stand motionless near certain plants for extended periods as if sensing something the others couldn't. And then there were the physical changes. Through my binoculars, I could see what appeared to be fungal growths emerging from injuries on their bodies. Their skin developed a greenish tint in patches. These changes weren't uniform. Some infected showed more advanced symptoms than others, but the pattern was unmistakable. I began documenting everything in a journal, using my background in botanical research to approach the situation methodically. I recorded times of day, weather conditions, specific behaviors, and physical characteristics. I sketched the fungal growths and compared them to known species in my reference books. Nothing matched exactly, but there were similarities to certain parasitic fungi that typically infect insects, cordyceps in particular, which replaces the tissue of its host while maintaining the host's external structure. The implications were disturbing. Was something similar happening to human hosts? I needed more information, which meant taking risks. I began venturing further from the garden center on carefully planned excursions, avoiding areas with high concentrations of infected. On one such excursion to a nearby housing development, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. In what had once been a home office, I discovered a blood-stained journal belonging to Dr. Marcus Chen, a researcher in plant-based pharmaceuticals whom I'd met at several scientific conferences. The journal was partially destroyed, many pages torn or stained beyond readability, but what remained described a classified research project that combined plant genetics with human cells. The goal had been noble enough, creating enhanced medicinal compounds by incorporating plant metabolic pathways into human tissue cultures. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. The modified plant cells had begun exhibiting aggressive growth patterns, essentially hijacking the human cellular structures rather than complementing them. The final entries were fragmented, but one phrase stood out clearly. Cross-kingdom. Transmission confirmed. It's spreading through both plant and animal tissue now. This discovery was still fresh in my mind when I spotted the group of survivors from my window, Melissa and her 5 students, running from a pack of infected. They moved with purpose and discipline, clearly had been surviving together for some time, but they were exhausted and about to be cut off. I made a split-second decision and created a diversion, throwing a packet of seed-starting soil at a nearby car. The impact set off the car alarm, drawing the infected away from the group's escape route. I hadn't intended for them to see me, but the woman, Melissa, spotted me watching from the window. Our eyes met and she made a questioning gesture toward the garden center. 2 hours later, after cautious negotiations through a partially opened door, I had invited 6 strangers into my sanctuary. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. My supplies were calculated for one person, and introducing others created countless variables and risks. But something about the way Melissa had protected those kids, keeping them alive and together through weeks of horror, convinced me to take the chance. Melissa Parker had been a biology teacher at Westridge High School. The 5 teenagers, Jake, Maya, Zoe, Tyler, and Devin, had been on a field trip to a nature preserve with her when the outbreak reached their town. The school buses never came to pick them up. Cell service failed, and Melissa made the decision to keep the students with her rather than separating. We were studying ecosystem resilience, she told me that first night, as they ate fresh vegetables from my greenhouse. Ironic, right? Learning about how natural systems adapt to catastrophic change and then experiencing it firsthand. The kids were surprisingly resilient. Jake, a tall, athletic 17-year-old, had taken on the role of protector, always volunteering for the riskiest tasks. Zoe, with her practical mindset and organizational skills, managed their supplies and kept track of their needs. Tyler's mechanical aptitude had saved them multiple times when they needed to repair equipment or hotwire vehicles. Devin was the youngest at 15, quiet but observant, often noticing dangers the others missed. And then there was Maya. Something about her struck me as different from the first moment. While the others peppered me with questions about my survival setup, Maya's attention was fixed on my seed bank. She asked pointed, knowledgeable questions about specific varieties and their properties. When I mentioned my background in botanical anthropology, a flicker of intense interest crossed her face. "My brother worked in agricultural biotechnology," she said. "He told me about people like you trying to preserve heirloom varieties. He said it might be more important than people realized." I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. "Your brother was right. He worked for Agrinova," she added, watching my reaction carefully. My missing finger twinged at the mention of the corporation. I'd liberated seeds from their facility, after all, and lost my finger in the process. But I kept my expression neutral. "Interesting. What department?" "Genetic engineering. Plant resilience division." Her gaze was steady, evaluating my response. Before I could ask follow-up questions, Jake called her away to help with setting up their sleeping area. But the exchange left me uneasy. How much did she know about Agrinova's projects? Was her brother connected to Dr. Chen's research? Over the next few days, I established a teaching routine. Survival now depended on knowledge that had been commonplace for our ancestors, but had become specialized in our modern world. I taught them how to identify edible plants versus toxic lookalikes, how to propagate vegetables from cuttings, how to create simple hydroponic systems using damaged aquariums from the garden center's pet section. Jake was nearly poisoned during one of these lessons. He mistook water hemlock for Queen Anne's lace, an easy error to make for the untrained eye, but potentially fatal. I caught him just before he handled the toxic plant with bare hands. "This is why we verify before we touch," I said, showing him the subtle differences. "Nature doesn't forgive careless mistakes." The incident reinforced the importance of my knowledge while emphasizing how vulnerable we all were. One simple error could mean death, especially now that medical care was non-existent. As we established our routines, I began noticing small discrepancies in our inventory. Seeds would go missing from my organized collection. Small amounts of growing medium would disappear. Tools would be moved from their designated locations. At first, I attributed it to the general chaos of having 6 new people in a space designed for commercial use, not communal living. But the pattern was too consistent to be accidental. I began monitoring my seed bank more carefully, setting up subtle markers that would indicate if someone had accessed it. 3 days later, I had my answer. Maya was taking specific seed varieties and small amounts of equipment. She was being methodical about it, never taking enough to raise immediate alarms, selecting varieties that weren't critical to our current food production. Rather than confronting her directly, I decided to observe. One night, while she was supposed to be asleep, I followed her to a hidden corner of the damaged greenhouse section. She had established a small growing area using materials borrowed from our main production. She was cultivating several plants that weren't part of our food production, plants with specific medicinal or biochemical properties. Most concerning was a specimen that appeared to be one of the anomalous plants I'd observed before the collapse, the same type that had shown unusual growth patterns in our research facility. Where had she gotten it? Had she brought it with her, or found it locally? I decided to keep my discovery to myself for the time being. Maya wasn't endangering our immediate survival, and I needed to understand her motivations before taking action. But I began keeping closer watch on her activities, and secured the most critical components of my seed bank with improvised locks. Meanwhile, the situation outside our sanctuary was deteriorating rapidly. The number of infected in the area continued to increase daily. From our rooftop observation point, we could see them gathering in larger groups, sometimes moving together, in coordinated ways that defied the typical zombie behavior depicted in pre-collapse fiction. We needed supplies. Our food crops were growing, but not fast enough to sustain 7 people. After careful planning, we organized an expedition to a nearby home and garden store that Zoe remembered passing during their journey to my garden center. Jake, Tyler, Melissa, and I would go, while Maya, Zoe, and Devin maintained our base. The excursion was high risk but necessary. We moved carefully through backyards and side streets, avoiding main roads where infected tended to congregate. The Garden store was partially looted but still contained valuable supplies, more seeds, specialized tools, additional growing mediums, and unexpected treasures like a collection of books on traditional farming and herbalism. As we gathered supplies, Tyler discovered something that would prove invaluable: a set of solar-powered garden lights with detachable panels. With some modification, these could provide limited electricity for essential needs. Our return journey was tense. We had collected more than we could carry inconspicuously, making us slower and more visible. At one point, we were forced to hide in a drainage culvert as a group of infected passed alarmingly close to our position. I noticed again the fungal growths on their exposed skin, more advanced than what I'd observed previously. When we finally made it back to the garden center, the others were visibly relieved. Maya in particular seemed anxious, repeatedly asking if we'd seen anything unusual about the infected. Her questions were specific enough to raise my suspicions further. Using the new supplies, we expanded our growing operation. Tyler rigged the solar panels to charge a small battery, giving us minimal electricity for essentials. I established a new propagation area for preserving our expanding collection of local plant specimens, continuing my documentation of abnormal growth patterns. Our first significant harvest from the greenhouse was cause for celebration: fresh vegetables after weeks of scavenged and rationed food. That night, gathered around a carefully shielded light, we allowed ourselves a moment of optimism. Melissa even produced a bottle of wine she'd been saving from their earlier scavenging, one small cup each, even for the teenagers. A toast to survival. The moment of celebration was short-lived. The next morning, while checking the perimeter, I spotted them through my binoculars, infected, hundreds of them, moving toward our location with that strange coordination I'd observed in smaller groups. This wasn't random wandering. They were coming specifically for us. By midday, they had surrounded the garden center completely. We implemented emergency protocols, minimizing movement, extinguishing all lights, communicating in whispers. Through small gaps in our barricades, we could see them. They weren't attacking, not yet. They were waiting, almost as if they were responding to some signal we couldn't perceive. As night fell, the real terror began. In the darkness, we could see a faint bioluminescence emanating from the fungal growths on the more advanced infected. They were communicating somehow, patterns of light pulsing between them like signals, huddled together in the center of our sanctuary. We watched through cracks in the barricades as the infected displayed behaviors that confirmed my worst theories about their evolution. This was no longer just a virus turning humans into mindless cannibals. This was something far more complex and terrifying. A cross-kingdom mutation creating a hybrid organism that was neither fully human nor fully plant. And somehow I was certain that the contents of my seed bank, the genetic diversity I'd spent my life preserving, might be the key to understanding and potentially fighting this new threat. The apocalypse had transformed my obscure expertise from academic curiosity to essential knowledge for humanity's survival. As dawn approached and the infected continued their silent vigil around our sanctuary, I made a decision. I would share my full theories with the group, including my suspicions about Maya's secret activities. We needed complete transparency if we were going to survive not just this immediate threat, but the transformed world that awaited us. With the horde surrounding us, I gathered everyone in the back office of the garden center at dawn. It was time to share everything I knew and suspected. I spread out my journals and Dr. Chen's partially destroyed notes on the desk. I need to show you what we're really dealing with, I said. These aren't just mindless infected. They're evolving. I explained my observations of the fungal growths, the bioluminescent signaling, the coordinated movements. I described the research I'd found in Dr. Chen's journal and my own pre-collapse studies of abnormal plant behavior. Then I connected the dots between Agrinova's genetic engineering division and what was happening now. I believe the virus causing the zombie outbreak has plant DNA engineered into it, I told them. It's not just killing humans and reanimating them. It's transforming them into hybrid organisms that combine characteristics of both kingdoms, plant and animal. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Melissa spoke up, her biology teacher background helping her grasp the implications immediately. That would explain the photosynthetic pigmentation in their skin, she said. I noticed it but couldn't make sense of it. They're partially photosynthesizing, aren't they? I nodded. That's why they stand motionless in sunlight for long periods. They're gathering energy, and that's why they're more active and coordinated than traditional zombies would be. They're not running on decomposing human tissue alone. Jake, ever. Practical, cut to the chase. How does this help us survive right now with hundreds of them surrounding us? It might not immediately, I admitted. But understanding what we're facing changes our long-term strategy. These organisms will evolve differently than we would expect. They'll develop new capabilities. And they might have specific vulnerabilities we can exploit. That's when I turned to Maya, who had been unusually quiet during my explanation. And I think Maya might have information that could help us. All eyes turned to her. She paled but didn't deny it. You've been taking specific seed varieties and equipment, I said gently. You've set up an experimental growing area, and you have knowledge about AgriNova's research through your brother. We need to know what you know. Maya looked at the floor for a long moment, then at the faces of the people who had become her survival family. She took a deep breath. My brother, David, was a genetic engineer at AgriNova, she began. He was working on a project combining plant and human cellular structures to create medical applications, treatments for diseases, ways to help human bodies heal faster using plant regenerative abilities. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 2 months before the outbreak, he called me, terrified. He said the research had gone in a direction he never intended, that military contractors had become involved, that his supervisors were ignoring safety protocols. He said if anything happened, I should find someone who understood heirloom plant varieties because they might contain natural resistance factors that modern hybridized plants don't have. She looked directly at me. When Melissa spotted you, in the window I saw your seed bank. I recognized what it was from David's descriptions. I knew we had to stay with you. I felt a chill run through me. What exactly was your brother working on? Do you know the details? Maya shook her head. Not entirely, but he sent me data, research notes, gene sequences. I memorized as much as I could. He said certain heirloom varieties contained compounds that naturally inhibited the engineered organisms they were creating. That explained her interest in my seed collection. She wasn't just curious. She was looking for specific varieties that might contain these inhibitory compounds. That's why I've been experimenting, she continued. I've been trying to germinate and test different varieties based on what I remember from David's research. Melissa put a hand on Maya's shoulder. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wasn't sure. Because I'm not a scientist. I'm a high school student who listened to her brother's frightened phone calls. I didn't want to give false hope. I understood her hesitation, but we couldn't afford secrets anymore. Not with the horde surrounding us. From now on, we work together. On this, I said. Maya will share everything she remembers about her brother's research. I'll contribute my botanical knowledge. Melissa can add her biology expertise. The rest of you will help with the practical implementation. That morning marked the beginning of a more structured approach to our survival. Despite the immediate danger outside, we established a teaching routine. Each morning, I would gather everyone for lessons on plant identification, focusing particularly on species that might have properties useful against the infected. I created a system for testing and cataloging plants, drawing on my research background. We collected specimens from within our perimeter, carefully documenting their characteristics and potential uses. We established protocols for handling unknown species, after Jake's near miss with the water hemlock. Maya's knowledge, though fragmentary, proved invaluable. She remembered specific genetic markers her brother had mentioned, sequences that existed in certain heritage varieties but had been bred out of modern commercial crops. We began systematically testing the seeds in my collection against her descriptions. The problem, I explained to the group, is that commercial agriculture selects for traits like yield, appearance, and shipping durability. In the process, we've bred out thousands of secondary compounds that plants naturally produce to protect themselves from predators and disease. Like natural pesticides? Tyler asked. Exactly. Plants can't run from threats, so they developed chemical defenses instead. Many medicinal compounds we use today evolved as plant protection mechanisms. But modern crops have had these defensive capabilities weakened through selective breeding. This became our focus, identifying and propagating plants with strong natural defense compounds that might affect the infected. We weren't just growing food anymore. We were creating a living pharmacy and research laboratory. Meanwhile, the horde remained around our sanctuary. Their numbers fluctuated, sometimes dropping to a few dozen, other times swelling to hundreds. They never launched a coordinated attack, which itself was unusual and disturbing. It was as if they were studying us as much as we were studying them. Through careful observation, I began to recognize patterns in their behavior. The infected with more advanced fungal growths would often direct the activities of the less developed ones. They would position themselves to maximize sun exposure during the day. At night, they would cluster together, their bioluminescent growths, pulsing in patterns too regular to be random. One morning, about a week after the horde first surrounded us, I observed something that confirmed my worst fears. A fallen infected lay on the asphalt of the parking lot, its body decomposing in the sun. Around it, new growth was emerging, plants with the same unusual characteristics I'd noted in our research greenhouse before the collapse. The infected wasn't just dying, it was seeding. I called Melissa to the observation point immediately. As a biology teacher, she would understand the implications. They're completing a reproductive cycle, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. The human host dies and the plant component spreads through spores or seeds. Which means the infection can spread without direct contact, I added. It could be airborne at certain stages. This discovery added urgency to our research. We needed to find something, anything, that could protect us from not just bites, but potentially spore-based transmission. We began experimenting with natural compounds known to have antifungal properties: garlic, ginger, certain herbs, and tree resins. Maya was particularly focused on a variety of Andean potato that her brother had specifically mentioned. I had 3 specimens in my seed bank, a variety called Papa purpura, that contained high levels of natural fungicides in its skin and leaves. We gave these precious plants premium growing conditions, nurturing them carefully in the hopes they might provide some protection. All these activities required resources beyond what we had in the garden center. Despite the danger, we needed to conduct more supply runs. We developed a system for these expeditions. Jake and Tyler would handle security, Melissa would identify useful materials, and I would search for specific plant materials and seeds. During one such expedition to a nearby house with an extensive garden, we had a close call that nearly cost us everything. We were carefully harvesting medicinal herbs when a small group of infected emerged from the tree line. They moved with that unsettling purposefulness I'd come to recognize in the more evolved specimens. We immediately implemented our emergency protocol. No sudden movements, no noise, minimal visibility. We crouched behind a garden wall, hardly daring to breathe. The infected moved through the garden methodically, almost as if they were inspecting the plants. One stopped directly beside our hiding place, so close I could see the complex fungal structures growing from its eye socket. Then something unexpected happened. The infected recoiled from a patch of strong-smelling herbs we had just been harvesting, common rue, known for its potent volatile oils. It backed away, avoiding direct contact with the plant. We remained frozen until the infected moved on, then carefully retreated to our sanctuary. But that interaction gave us valuable data. Certain plant compounds might repel the infected, at least at certain stages of their development. Back at the garden center, we immediately began testing this theory, carefully placing different aromatic plants at various points around our perimeter and observing the infected's reactions. Some plants, like rue and wormwood, consistently cause the infected to alter their paths. Others, like lavender and thyme, showed no effect. Maya suggested an explanation based on her brother's research. The fungal component might be sensitive to certain terpenoids, plant compounds that often serve as natural pesticides. If we can identify which specific compounds are most effective, we could create concentrated repellents. This became our focus in the following days, cultivating the plants that showed repellent effects and experimenting with methods to extract and concentrate their essential oils. Tyler's mechanical aptitude proved crucial here, as he improvised a simple distillation apparatus using equipment from the garden center. During this period, I continued to observe Maya carefully. While she had shared her knowledge of her brother's research, I sensed she was still holding something back. Her private growing area remained, though now with our knowledge and approval. But she spent long hours there, taking meticulous notes on plants that weren't part of our main research focus. One evening, as sunset approached and we were preparing to secure the building for the night, I found her in her research corner, examining a plant specimen with unusual characteristics, leaf structures and coloration that didn't match any species I recognized. "What is that?" I asked. She started, clearly not having heard me approach. "It's something I collected before we met you, from a research outbuilding near where David worked." I leaned closer, professional curiosity overriding my suspicion. The plant had characteristics of several different species, as if someone had combined genetic material from multiple sources. Its leaves showed a pattern of venation I'd never seen in nature. "This is a transgenic specimen," I said. "Engineered in a lab." Maya nodded. "It's one of the prototypes from David's project. He smuggled a sample to me when he realized what was happening. I've been trying to understand its properties." I felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. "Maya, this could be incredibly valuable for our research, but also potentially dangerous. Why keep it secret after everything we've discussed?" She looked away. "Because David said that in the wrong hands, this plant could be weaponized. Its properties aren't just defensive, they can influence the behavior of the infected, control them potentially." The implications were staggering. If she was right, this plant specimen might offer more than protection. It might provide a way to manipulate the infected, perhaps even direct them away from human settlements. But it also raised serious ethical questions. Even in this apocalyptic world, the idea of creating biological weapons gave me pause. Would controlling the infected make us any better than those who had created this disaster in the first place? Before I could pursue this line of questioning, our conversation was interrupted by a shout from the roof. Tyler, on observation duty, was calling for everyone to come up immediately. We rushed to the roof access ladder, emerging onto our observation platform to a horrifying sight. The infected surrounding our sanctuary were changing their behavior patterns. Where before they had maintained a loose perimeter, now they were gathering in concentrated groups at specific points around the building, our weakest structural points, as if they somehow knew exactly where to apply pressure. "They're organizing for an attack," Jake said, his voice tight. Melissa pointed to an infected near the front entrance, one with extensive fungal growths covering much of its body. "Look at that one. It's directing the others." She was right. The heavily infected individual was making gestures that the others responded to, positioning themselves like soldiers preparing for an assault. "How could they know our weak points?" Zoe asked, fear evident in her voice. I had a disturbing theory. They're learning. The fungal network connecting them is collecting and sharing information. Every day they watch us, they understand more about our patterns in our sanctuary. As darkness fell, the infected began testing our defenses, pushing against doors and windows, searching for ways in. The barricades we'd constructed held, but some showed signs of stress under the coordinated pressure. We gathered in the central office to develop a contingency plan. It was clear that our sanctuary wouldn't remain secure indefinitely. We needed alternatives. "I have a suggestion," I said, spreading out a map of the region I'd recovered during one of our supply runs. "There's an agricultural research station in the Appalachian foothills, about 70 miles north of here. It's isolated, designed for self-sufficiency, and might have resources we could use to continue our research." 70 miles through infected territory? Jake shook his head. "That's suicide." "Not necessarily," Maya interjected. "Not if we can use what we've learned about repelling them. And, she hesitated, glancing at me, not if we can use the prototype plant to divert their attention. All eyes turned to her, then to me. I nodded slowly. Maya has been cultivating a transgenic plant specimen from her brother's research. It might have properties that could affect infected behavior. The revelation caused a stir among the group. Questions flew. Why hadn't she shared this earlier? Could it really work? Was it safe? It's not fully tested, Maya admitted. I've been experimenting in small ways, but I can't be certain of its effects on a large scale. We may not have a choice, Melissa said, looking around at our increasingly vulnerable sanctuary. If this place is compromised, we need an alternative, and we need an edge to get there safely. As the infected continued their testing of our defenses throughout the night, we developed a plan. We would prepare for evacuation to the research station, gathering our most essential supplies, research materials, and of course, my seed bank. Maya would accelerate her testing of the prototype plant, with my assistance and oversight. The next few days were a flurry of careful preparation, all while maintaining constant vigilance against the increasingly coordinated attempts by the infected to breach our sanctuary. We packed essential supplies into backpacks and durable containers, prioritizing seeds, plant specimens, research notes, and survival gear. Maya and I worked intensively with the prototype plant, trying to understand its properties and potential applications. We discovered that extracts from its leaves, when burned, produced a smoke that seemed to confuse the infected, disrupting their coordination temporarily. This could provide the diversion we needed for our escape. But there was something about the plant that continued to disturb me. Its growth patterns were too aggressive, too adaptable. It reminded me uncomfortably of the abnormal plant behavior I'd observed before the collapse. When I mentioned this to Maya, she became defensive. We need every advantage we can get, she insisted. This plant could save us all. Or it could make things worse, I countered. We don't fully understand its properties or its connection to the outbreak. Our disagreement remained unresolved as the pressure from outside intensified. The infected were now attempting to breach our defenses around the clock, working with an unsettling level of coordination. Small cracks were appearing in our barricades. Wooden supports were beginning to splinter under repeated impacts. It was becoming increasingly clear that our departure couldn't wait much longer. Our sanctuary, which had protected us for weeks, was on the verge of becoming our tomb. With each passing hour, the genetic material in my seed bank, perhaps humanity's best hope for understanding and fighting this new threat, came closer to being lost forever. The next morning, I stationed myself on the roof for an extended observation session. Through my binoculars, I studied the infected surrounding our garden center, documenting their physical changes with scientific detachment despite the horror they inspired. What I saw confirmed my worst theories about their evolution. The more advanced specimens had developed extensive fungal structures that had almost completely replaced their original human tissue. Their skin had taken on distinct green and brown coloration, with patterns resembling leaf venation. Some had growths that looked disturbingly like seed pods forming on their bodies. Most alarming were the filamentous structures extending between nearby infected, creating visible connections like mycelial networks between fungi. I sketched these observations in my journal, noting the similarities to certain parasitic fungi that infect insects and alter their behavior. Cordyceps fungi, for instance, can take control of an ant's nervous system, forcing it to climb to an elevated position before the fungus erupts from the ant's head, spreading spores to infect more hosts. What we were witnessing appeared to be a similar process but engineered to work in humans. While I observed, Melissa joined me on the roof, her biology training helping her grasp the implications of what we were seeing. "They're becoming a superorganism," she said quietly. "Individual bodies connected by a shared network." I nodded. The fungal structures are creating connections between them, allowing information sharing. That's why they're becoming more coordinated. "And more intelligent," she added, pointing to one heavily infected individual that appeared to be directing others. "Look at that one. It's clearly in a leadership role." I focused my binoculars on the specimen she indicated. It stood apart from the others, its body almost entirely transformed. Where its eyes had been, complex fungal structures had grown, extending outward like antennae. It moved with deliberate purpose, and others responded to its movements. "I think we're looking at the next stage of their development," I said. "This isn't just a virus anymore, it's creating a new species." Melissa's scientific curiosity momentarily overcame her fear. A human-plant hybrid, something that combines mobility and intelligence with photosynthetic capabilities and fungal network communication. Evolutionarily speaking, it's brilliant. And terrifying, I added, because it's using us as its growth medium. We continued our observations throughout the day, documenting behavioral patterns and physical changes. The infected seemed to have established a hierarchy, with the more transformed individuals coordinating the activities of the less developed ones. They rotated positions to ensure maximum sun exposure, almost like plants tracking the sun's movement. That evening, I gathered everyone in our central office to share our observations and finalize our evacuation plan. Maya brought her notes on the prototype plant, spreading them on the table alongside my sketches of the infected. "The changes are accelerating," I began. "They're developing new capabilities faster than we anticipated, and they're working together more effectively." Jake, ever practical, cut to the chase. "Bottom line, how long do we have before they get in?" 2 days, maybe 3, I answered honestly. "The barricades at the loading dock are showing significant stress. Even with continuous reinforcement, they'll eventually fail." "Then we need to move now," Zoe said. "While we can still choose when and how." I nodded. "I agree. But we need to be strategic. These aren't mindless zombies we can just outrun. They're observing us, learning from us." Maya stepped forward, indicating her notes. "I think I've figured out how to use the prototype plant effectively. The compounds it produces can disrupt their communication network temporarily. If we create enough smoke from burning the leaves, it could confuse them long enough for us to slip past." "Like a botanical EMP," Tyler suggested. "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "It won't harm them directly, but it should disrupt the signals between them. They'll revert to more basic behaviors for a short time." The plan we developed was straightforward, but dependent on precise timing. We would create multiple diversions using Maya's plant extract, administered as smoke bombs at different points around the perimeter. While the infected were disoriented, we would exit through a greenhouse panel we had secretly prepared as an escape route, one that wasn't visible from any direction the infected had been observed watching. We would travel light, only essential supplies, research materials, and of course my seed bank. Each person would carry a specific component, ensuring that even if someone was lost, the most critical materials would survive with the remaining group. Our destination was the Agricultural Research Station in the Appalachian foothills, approximately 70 miles north. We estimated the journey would take 5 to 7 days on foot, depending on terrain and infected activity. We mapped a route that avoided population centers and followed natural features that might provide both cover and forageable resources. With the plan established, we began final preparations. Each person packed their assigned gear and supplies. We conducted silent drills of our escape sequence. Maya and I worked frantically to harvest and process enough of the prototype plant to create our diversion. Working closely with Maya gave me an opportunity to press her further about her brother's research and the prototype plant. "You still haven't told me everything, have you?" I asked as we carefully extracted compounds from the plant leaves. She hesitated, her hands continuing their methodical work. "I told you what's relevant to our survival. Maya, we're about to risk 7 lives on this plan. Anything you know could be relevant." She stopped working and looked directly at me. "My brother didn't just send me information about plants that might inhibit the engineered organisms. He sent me data about how to potentially control them." I felt a chill run through me. "Control them how?" "The prototype plant produces compounds that can influence the fungal network, like chemical signals that can direct their behavior. David thought it might be a failsafe if the organisms ever escape containment. The implications were staggering. So we could potentially direct the infected away from us or even command them?" Theoretically, she said, but it's dangerous. The same compounds that allow control could potentially accelerate their development. If used incorrectly, it's like giving them evolutionary shortcuts. I considered this new information carefully. Is that what you've been working on in your private growing area? Trying to develop control mechanisms? She nodded. I thought if I could perfect it, we'd have a better chance of survival. Not just escaping, but potentially creating safe zones where the infected couldn't enter. Her intentions were understandable, even admirable, but the risk seemed enormous. Did your brother explain why this research was being done in the first place? What was the original purpose? Maya's expression darkened. He said it started as medical research, using plant regenerative capabilities to heal human injuries. But then military contractors got involved. They saw potential for enhancement rather than just healing. Soldiers who could photosynthesize, reducing the need for food. Troops that could communicate through chemical signals that enemies couldn't intercept. And then it got out of control, I guessed. David said the organisms began developing faster than they could predict. They started showing signs of independent intelligence. That's when he tried to shut it down and was overruled. She paused. The last time I heard from him, he said he was going to try to destroy the main research samples. I never heard from him again. Her revelation cast our situation in an even more disturbing light. What we were facing wasn't just a tragic accident or even a natural mutation. It was the result of deliberate human action, an attempt to create biological weapons that had backfired catastrophically. Despite my concerns about Maya's methods, her knowledge was now clearly essential to our survival. We worked together to prepare enough plant extract for multiple diversionary devices, which Tyler would construct using containers and ignition mechanisms scavenged from the garden center. As we worked, I continued monitoring the infected through regular observation sessions. What I saw on the third day of preparations confirmed the urgency of our departure. The infected were now actively testing different sections of our barricades, systematically applying pressure to identify weak points. They were no longer just surrounding us, they were strategizing. Most disturbing was their reaction to our movements inside the building. When we gathered near certain windows, infected would congregate outside those same windows shortly afterward, as if they could sense our presence through walls. Their sensory capabilities were clearly evolving, beyond normal human parameters. That night, as we completed our final preparations, we heard the first major breach of our defenses. A section of barricade in the loading dock area partially collapsed under coordinated pressure from multiple infected. Jake and Tyler managed to reinforce it temporarily, with shelving units and plant containers. But it was clear the failure was imminent. We move at dawn, I announced after they reported the breach. The sun will be in their eyes as it rises, giving us an additional advantage. We spent the remaining hours of darkness making final adjustments to our plan. Maya distributed small vials of plant extract to each person, a last resort if someone became separated from the group. Tyler finished constructing the smoke devices, testing one in the sealed bathroom to confirm its effectiveness. As the first light of dawn appeared, we gathered in the center of the garden center for final instructions. Everyone was equipped with a backpack containing their assigned supplies. Mine contained the most precious cargo, my seed bank, the genetic diversity that might hold the key to understanding and potentially counteracting the plant zombie mutation. Remember the plan, I said quietly. When the diversions are deployed, move quickly but carefully to the exit point. Stay together. If anyone gets separated, proceed to the rendezvous point at the abandoned fire tower 3 miles north. Wait 12 hours, then continue to the research station if the group doesn't arrive. I looked at each face in turn, these people who had become my unexpected family in this apocalyptic world. Their expressions showed fear, but also determination and trust. Even Maya, despite her secrets, had proven her commitment to our collective survival. Tyler deployed the first smoke device through a small opening in the front barricade. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The infected nearest to the smoke began moving erratically, their coordination visibly disrupted. Some staggered in circles while others stood motionless, as if suddenly deprived of instructions. Jake deployed the second device at the loading dock, where the largest concentration of infected had gathered near our weakened barricade. The same confusion spread through their ranks. The more advanced specimens seemed particularly affected, their movements becoming spasmodic and uncoordinated. With the infected disoriented, we moved quickly to our prepared exit point, a greenhouse panel we had carefully loosened over the past days. We slipped through one by one, emerging into the early morning light on the north side of the building, where infected activity had been minimal. We had barely cleared the building when we heard the sound of the loading dock barricade finally collapsing. The infected would soon flood into our former sanctuary, but by then we were already moving silently through the suburban landscape, using the routes we had carefully memorized from our rooftop observations. Our progress was tense but steady. For the first mile, we moved from cover to cover, avoiding open spaces, communicating with hand signals we had practiced. The suburbs gave way to a more rural landscape as we continued north, following a creek bed that provided both concealment and a water source. It was Devon, the quietest and most observant of the teenagers, who first noticed we were being followed. He signaled for a stop, pointing to movement in the trees behind us. Through my binoculars, I confirmed his sighting. 3 infected moving, with purpose tracking our path with unsettling precision. "How did they find us?" Zoe whispered. "They might be tracking our scent," I suggested, though I suspected something more complex was happening. "We need to pick up the pace. The creek widens ahead. We can cross and use the water to mask our trail." We increased our speed, staying within the cover of the trees lining the creek. The water grew deeper and faster as we continued northward, eventually reaching a point where it was too wide to cross without swimming. We followed it until we found a fallen tree, creating a natural bridge, carefully crossing one by one. On the far side, as Tyler, the last in our line, was crossing, one of the pursuing infected burst from the tree line. It moved with frightening speed, launching itself toward the fallen tree. Tyler froze momentarily, then scrambled the remaining distance as Jake and I pulled him to safety. The infected attempted to follow but lost its footing and fell into the swift water. What happened next confirmed my worst fears about their evolution. Rather than being swept away, the infected began to adapt before our eyes. Its limbs elongated, developing web-like structures between fingers that allowed it to navigate the current. It began moving toward the bank where we stood, its body transforming to meet the new challenge. "Run," I shouted, abandoning stealth. "Head for the ridge." We fled through the forest, pushing our bodies to their limits. Behind us, we heard splashing as the infected emerged from the creek, followed by the sounds of pursuit through underbrush. We had a head start, but the infected moved with unnatural speed and didn't tire as we did. The ridge I had indicated offered our best chance, a steep limestone outcropping that would be difficult to climb, but potentially impossible for the infected to navigate quickly. We reached its base and began climbing, helping each other up the more difficult sections. From my position near the top, I watched the infected approach the base of the ridge. There were 5 of them now, the original 3 joined by 2 more. They began trying to climb, but their transformed physiology, while advantageous in some environments, made the vertical ascent difficult. Their elongated limbs and fungal growths hindered rather than helped on the rocky surface. We reached the top of the ridge and continued without stopping, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the pursuing infected. The terrain worked in our favor now, rocky and open, lacking the vegetation that seemed to help the infected navigate and communicate. By mid-afternoon, we had reached the fire tower that was our designated rendezvous point. The metal structure stood abandoned on a hilltop, offering a clear view of the surrounding landscape. We climbed to the observation platform, allowing ourselves a brief rest while maintaining watch in all directions. "I don't see any sign of pursuit," Melissa said after scanning with the binoculars. "I think we lost them at the ridge." "For now," I cautioned, "but they're adapting constantly. We should assume they're still tracking us somehow." Maya approached me as the others tended to minor injuries and rationed our water supply. "The prototype plant extract worked better than I expected," she said. "Did you see how it affected the more developed specimens?" I nodded. It disrupted their network completely. The advanced ones were more affected because they're more connected to the network. Which means the compounds could potentially be weaponized against them, she suggested. If we could produce enough of it at the research station. Let's focus on reaching the station first, I interrupted. And Maya, we need to be careful. Those compounds clearly affect the infected, but we don't fully understand how. They could accelerate mutation as easily as disrupt it. She nodded reluctantly. I know, I just can't help thinking about what David was trying to tell me. He believed there was a way to control them, maybe even reverse the process. And we'll explore that possibility, I assured her. But methodically, scientifically. No more experiments without full transparency. We rested at the fire tower for 2 hours, then continued our journey northward as the afternoon waned. The landscape became increasingly rural, with scattered farms and larger stretches of forest. We avoided farm buildings, which often harbored infected, and kept to the woods where possible. As dusk approached, we needed to find shelter for the night. Moving after dark was too dangerous, both because of the infected and because of natural hazards and unfamiliar terrain. We eventually discovered an abandoned hunting cabin set back from a small country road. It was rudimentary, but secure, with shuttered windows and a solid door. After carefully clearing and securing the cabin, we established a watch rotation and prepared a cold meal from our supplies. As we ate, I noticed Maya examining plants she had collected during our journey, comparing them to notes in a small journal. "What are you looking for?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Signs of infection in wild plants," she replied. "If the fungal network is spreading through plant life as well as human hosts, there should be indicators. Unusual growth patterns, structural abnormalities, coloration changes." I examined the specimens she had collected. Most appeared normal, but one caught my attention, a common chickweed with subtly altered leaf structure and venation patterns. "This one's changing," I confirmed. "The cellular structure is reorganizing itself. It's early stage, but unmistakable." Maya nodded grimly. "I've found 3 species showing similar changes, all common weeds that grow near human habitation." The implications were disturbing. If the infection was spreading through plant life, containing it would be virtually impossible. It could potentially create an entirely new ecosystem, one inhospitable to unmodified human life. That night, as I took my turn on watch, I gazed out at the moonlit landscape from the cabin's single window. The familiar countryside, fields, forests, scattered buildings, suddenly seemed alien and threatening. Every plant could potentially be part of the spreading network. Every shadow could hide infected evolving in ways we couldn't predict. For the first time since the outbreak began, I questioned whether humanity could reclaim the world at all. Perhaps the best we could hope for was to carve out isolated enclaves, protected by whatever plant-based defenses we could develop from my seed bank. But then I remembered the seed varieties I carried. Thousands of years of agricultural heritage, plants that had co-evolved with humans and survived countless blights, diseases, and climate shifts. If anything could help us understand and counter this new threat, it would be this genetic diversity that I had dedicated my life to preserving. As dawn broke, we prepared to continue our journey. According to my map, we were approximately 40 miles from the agricultural research station, 3 or 4 more days of travel, depending on the conditions we encountered. What we didn't know was whether the station would still be operational or what we might find there. But it represented our best hope, a facility designed for botanical research, potentially with equipment and resources we could use to understand and fight the plant zombie evolution that threatened to engulf the world. As we set out in the early morning light, I felt the weight of the seed bank in my pack, not just physically, but metaphorically. These seeds, once dismissed as obsolete curiosities by modern agriculture, now carried the potential to be humanity's salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes the past contains exactly what we need to survive the future. We lost Maya on the morning of the 3rd day. It happened so quickly, none of us had time to react. We were crossing an overgrown field, moving in single file through tall grass to minimize our visibility. Maya was 3rd in line, between Jake and Zoe. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone. No scream, no struggle, just absence, where a person had been. Jake signaled a halt, and we immediately formed a defensive circle, backs to each other, scanning in all directions. The grass around us swayed gently in the breeze, revealing nothing unusual. No sign of infected, no disturbance that would indicate a struggle. "Did anyone see what happened?" Melissa whispered. No one had. It was as if Maya had simply vanished. We called her name softly, then with increasing urgency, but received no response. I made the difficult decision to split our group temporarily for a search. Jake, Tyler, and I would look for Maya, while Melissa, Zoe, and Devin maintained our defensive position and guarded our supplies. We established clear signals and a strict time limit for the search, 20 minutes, no longer. We couldn't risk losing more people. Following the path we had taken, we searched methodically, examining every foot of ground. 10 minutes into our search, Tyler found a small notebook, Maya's research journal. The pages were open to her notes on the prototype plant, with recent additions I hadn't seen before. Nearby, Jake discovered disturbed earth and vegetation indicating something had been dragged away from our path. We followed the trail cautiously, moving as silently as possible. It led to a small ravine about 50 yards from our route, well concealed by the tall grass. As we approached the edge, we heard voices, actual human speech, not the moans of the infected. Dropping to our stomachs, we crawled forward until we could see into the ravine. What we saw froze my blood. Maya was there, alive but restrained, speaking with two figures in what appeared to be modified hazmat suits. Behind them was a vehicle, an actual functioning military-style transport with camouflage covering. "The specimens are evolving faster than projected," one of the suited figures was saying. "Your brother's models predicted a 6-month timeline for Stage 3 development, but we're seeing it at 4 months. "I told you, I don't know anything about the models," Maya responded, her voice surprisingly calm. "David only shared what he thought I needed to survive." "But you've been experimenting with the prototype," the other figure said. "We've been tracking your activities. The control compounds you've developed show promise." Jake and Tyler looked at me, their expressions asking the obvious question. Who were these people, and what did they know about the outbreak? I signaled for patience, wanting to gather more information before acting. "Where are the others you were traveling with?" the first figure demanded. "Our intel shows 7 individuals." "I was separated from them," Maya answered. And I noted, she was protecting us despite her capture. "We were attacked by infected and scattered. I don't know if anyone else survived." "She's lying," the second figure said flatly. "Biosignature tracking shows multiple human life signs in the immediate vicinity." At those words, Jake signaled urgently that we needed to retreat. We backed away slowly, then ran in a low crouch back to where the others waited. I quickly explained what we had seen as we gathered our supplies. "We need to move now," I insisted. "Their vehicle gives them a mobility advantage, and they clearly have technology we don't understand. Biosignature tracking, that's beyond anything I've heard of." We moved quickly away from the field, heading east instead of north to throw off immediate pursuit. Our planned route to the research station would have to be altered. As we traveled, my mind raced with questions. Who were these people? Government? Military? Private contractors? And what did they know about the outbreak? Most disturbing was their casual discussion of projected evolution and models for the infected's development. It implied not just knowledge of the outbreak, but anticipation of it. Had this been a planned release rather than an accident? The thought was almost too horrific to contemplate. After putting several miles between ourselves and the field where Maya was taken, we paused in a dense grove of trees to reassess our situation. The day was wearing on, and we needed a new plan. "We can't just leave her," Zoe insisted. "Maya's one of us." "They didn't seem to be hurting her," Tyler pointed out. "They wanted information." "Information about things Maya kept secret from us," I reminded them. "The prototype plant, her brother's research. She knew more than she shared even after. We agreed to full transparency. Melissa, ever the voice of reason, interjected. We don't have the capability to go against armed individuals with advanced technology. Our priority has to be reaching the research station with the seed bank intact. I knew she was right, but the decision felt wrong. Maya had been part of our group, our impromptu family in this apocalyptic world. Abandoning her went against everything we had come to stand for, but risking the seed bank, potentially humanity's best hope for understanding and fighting the infection, was a greater moral compromise. We continued to the research station, I decided finally, but we adjust our route to avoid open areas, where we might be spotted from the air or tracked using whatever technology they have, and we maintain awareness. If they're looking for us, they'll likely focus on the station too. No one was happy with the decision, but everyone understood the logic. We revised our route, now planning to approach the research station from the east using a series of ridgelines for cover. It would add at least a day to our journey, but potentially improve our chances of arriving undetected. For the remainder of that day, we moved cautiously through increasingly forested terrain. As we traveled, I noticed something disturbing about the plant life around us. Subtle changes in coloration and structure, similar to what Maya had documented, were becoming more common, not just in isolated specimens, but across entire species. I pointed this out to Melissa, whose biology background helped her recognize the significance. The infection is establishing itself in the ecosystem, she confirmed, but it's not uniform. Some plants seem completely unaffected, while others are showing advanced changes. This observation gave me hope. If some plant species were naturally resistant to the infection, there might be compounds within them that could help protect humans or even counter the infected's development. I began collecting samples of both affected and unaffected plants as we traveled, documenting the differences. As evening approached, we needed to find shelter for the night. The forested hills offered few options, but we eventually discovered an abandoned Forest Service cabin tucked into a hillside. Like many structures we'd encountered, it showed signs of hasty abandonment, personal belongings left behind, food still in cabinets, a vehicle with keys in the ignition but an empty fuel tank in the small parking area. We secured the cabin, using our established protocols, then prepared a meager meal from our supplies. Everyone was subdued, Maya's absence leaving a palpable void in our group dynamic. She had been our connection to understanding the scientific background of what was happening. Without her knowledge of her brother's research, we were working with incomplete information, or so I thought, until Devin approached me quietly after dinner. Maya gave me something, he said, pulling a small USB drive from his pocket. The day before she disappeared. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to you. I stared at the tiny device in disbelief. Did she say what was on it? Devin shook his head. Just that it was important, and that you would know what to do with it. The USB drive was useless without a computer, but its existence suggested Maya had been preparing for the possibility of separation or capture. She had chosen Devin as her confidant, the quietest member of our group, the one least likely to draw attention. I pocketed the drive carefully. Thank you for telling me. We'll find a way to access this when we reach the research station. Do you think she knew those people would take her? Devin asked. I don't know, I answered honestly. But she clearly knew more about what's happening than she shared with us. That night, taking my turn on watch, I contemplated what we had learned. The presence of organized, technologically equipped humans tracking Maya specifically suggested this apocalypse had layers we hadn't yet uncovered. The casual discussion of projected timelines for the infecteds, evolution implied a level of foreknowledge that was deeply troubling. Had the outbreak been deliberately engineered? Was it an experiment gone wrong or something more sinister? And if people with resources and knowledge were still operating in this new world, what were their goals? Dawn brought heavy rain, which I considered a blessing despite the discomfort. Rain would mask our scent and make any kind of tracking more difficult. We set out early, moving steadily northeast toward the research station. According to my map, we were less than 15 miles away now, The landscape changed as we progressed, transitioning from dense forest to a patchwork of abandoned farmland and wooded lots. We moved carefully, using tree lines for cover whenever possible. At one point, we heard the distant sound of a vehicle, engine, and immediately took cover, watching as a similar military-style transport to the one we'd seen yesterday passed on a road about half a mile away. "They're expanding their search," Jake observed grimly. By mid-afternoon, we caught our first glimpse of the research station, a collection of low buildings surrounded by experimental growing fields, set in a small valley between two ridgelines. Through my binoculars, I could see that parts of the facility appeared intact, but there was no sign of human activity. We observed for over an hour before approaching, watching for any movement that might indicate the presence of infected or the people who had taken Maya. Seeing nothing concerning, we began our approach, using a drainage culvert that ran beneath the access road to avoid open exposure. The main building of the research station was a two-story structure with laboratory spaces, offices, and a small residential wing for researchers conducting extended studies. The entrance was secured with a keycard system that had failed when the power went out, leaving the doors locked but potentially bypassed through windows or service entrances. Tyler, with his mechanical aptitude, managed to access the building through a loading dock at the rear. We entered cautiously, clearing each room methodically before proceeding deeper into the facility. The interior was dusty, but largely intact. No signs of violence or struggle, just the same hasty abandonment we'd seen elsewhere. Most importantly, the research station had been designed with self-sufficiency in mind. Solar panels on the roof had maintained minimal power to certain systems. A rainwater collection system fed into filtration equipment, and the laboratory spaces contained exactly the kind of equipment we needed to analyze plant samples and, potentially, develop countermeasures to the infection. "This is better than I hoped," I admitted as we completed our initial survey of the facility. "With these resources, we might actually be able to understand what's happening and find ways to fight it." Melissa immediately began examining the laboratory equipment, her teaching background giving her enough familiarity to identify what would be useful. "Most of this is still functional. The solar power maintained the essential systems. We can work with this." We secured the building thoroughly before beginning to settle in, blocking ground floor windows and establishing watch positions with good visibility of the surrounding area. Then we began organizing our research materials: my seed bank, the plant samples we had collected, Maya's notes, and the USB drive Devin had given me. The station had a small generator that we could use sparingly, which allowed us to power a laptop computer found in one of the offices. When we connected Maya's USB drive, we found a treasure trove of information: her brother David's research notes, genetic sequences, experimental results, and most importantly, his personal journal, documenting the project's evolution from medical research to something far more alarming. According to David's notes, the project had begun with noble intentions, using plant genetic material to enhance human healing capabilities. Initial results were promising, with tissue cultures showing improved regeneration. But when military funding increased, the research direction shifted toward enhancement rather than healing. The goal became creating soldiers with plant-like characteristics: photosynthetic skin that could supplement caloric intake, improved regenerative capabilities, and most disturbing, the ability to communicate through chemical signals that couldn't be intercepted electronically. The researchers engineered a fungal vector to deliver the genetic modifications efficiently into human tissue. David's final entries documented his growing horror as the modified organisms began showing signs of intelligence and self-direction beyond their programming. His attempts to shut down the research were overruled by military officials who saw the potential for a revolutionary biological weapon. His last entry simply read, "I'm going to destroy the primary samples tonight. If anything happens to me, Maya knows what to do." The implications were clear. The outbreak hadn't been an accident, but an intentional deployment or, at minimum, a containment failure that certain parties had anticipated. The people who had taken Maya were likely connected to the original research, trying to maintain control of a situation that had long since exceeded their grasp. Most importantly, David's research contained information about plant compounds, that could potentially inhibit the fungal vector's spread. He had identified several heritage crop varieties that contained natural antifungal properties the engineered organism couldn't overcome, varieties that happened to be in my seed bank. "This changes everything," I told the group after we had reviewed the files. "We're not just surviving anymore. We have the knowledge and resources to potentially fight back." Over the next days, we established a working laboratory and living space within the research station. Melissa and I focused on analyzing the plant varieties David had identified as having inhibitory properties, while Tyler worked on maintaining and improving the station's infrastructure. Jake, Zoe, and Devin handled security and began establishing growing areas for both food crops and experimental plants. Using the station's equipment, we confirmed that certain heirloom varieties in my collection, particularly an Andean potato called Papa purpura and a variety of maize from the Hopi people, contained compounds that disrupted the fungal communication network of the infected. These weren't cures, but they could potentially create safe zones where the infected couldn't effectively coordinate. We also discovered something unexpected by analyzing plant samples from the area around the research station. Some wild plants were not just resistant to the infection, but actively antagonistic to it, producing compounds that killed the fungal components on contact. Nature, as it so often does, was already developing its own defenses against the new threat. 1 week after establishing our base at the research station, we had our first major breakthrough. By combining extracts from 3 different plant sources, the Papa purpura potato, a wild fungus-resistant moss, and the bark of a specific maple tree, we created a compound that not only disrupted infected communication, but actually reversed some of the fungal growth in tissue samples. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it was proof that the infection could be fought using natural compounds rather than the high-tech approaches the original researchers had pursued. The answer had been in the natural world all along, in the genetic diversity of plants that had co-evolved with fungi for millions of years, developing their own defensive compounds. As we refined our formula, we began testing methods of delivery. A direct application would work for individual treatment, but for creating safe zones, we needed something airborne or environmentally persistent. Tyler suggested adapting agricultural sprayers to distribute a diluted solution over wide areas. 10 days into our work at the research station, while testing different delivery methods in one of the experimental fields, we spotted a military transport approaching along the access road. Through binoculars, I could see it was the same type of vehicle used by the people who had taken Maya. We immediately implemented our emergency protocol, retreating to defensive positions within the main building where we had prepared fallback measures. But as the vehicle approached, I noticed something unusual through my binoculars. Maya was sitting in the passenger seat, apparently unrestrained, and she appeared to be directing the driver. When the vehicle stopped in the central courtyard, Maya emerged alone. She stood for a moment, then called out, "Dario, it's me. I need to talk to you. It's important." I signaled to the others to maintain their positions while I approached cautiously, stepping out from the building's entrance with my hands visible. "Maya, are you all right? Who are these people?" She walked toward me, stopping at a respectful distance. "They're from the Containment Division, a government unit established to monitor and control the outbreak. They've been tracking me because of my connection to David." "Are you here voluntarily?" I asked, still suspicious. "Yes," she said firmly. After they explained what they know and what they're trying to do, I convinced them to bring me here. "We need to work together, Dario. They have resources and information we need." "Why should we trust them?" I demanded. "They took you by force." "Because they're afraid," she said simply. "They're watching what they created spin out of control, and they don't know how to stop it. But we do. The plant varieties in your seed bank, they're the key. David was right about that." I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of coercion or deception. Finding none, I made a decision. "Tell them they can send one representative unarmed to talk. The rest stay with the vehicle." Maya nodded and returned to the transport. After a brief conversation, a woman emerged, middle-aged, wearing civilian clothes rather than the hazmat suit I had observed during Maya's capture. She approached slowly, hands visible. "Dr. Calloway," she said when she reached us. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Voss. I was the head of the original research project before it was militarized. I've spent the last 4 months trying to contain what we unleashed." "What exactly did you unleash?" I asked bluntly. "Something we never intended," she admitted. "A cross-kingdom hybrid that's evolving beyond our ability to predict or control. We designed it to enhance human capabilities using plant genetic material. Instead, it's replacing humans with something new. And now you want our help." "Yes," she said simply. "Maya tells me you've developed plant-based compounds that can disrupt the fungal network. That's more progress than we've made. With all our technology and resources, nature had the answer all along, just as your work always suggested." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same corporate and military interests that had dismissed traditional agricultural knowledge as obsolete were now dependent on it for survival. The heirloom seeds I had dedicated my life to preserving, often against active opposition from the scientific establishment, now represented humanity's best hope. "If we work together," I said carefully, "it will be as equals. Full information sharing, full transparency. No more secrets." Dr. Voss nodded. "Agreed. We have facilities, equipment, and personnel that could multiply your effectiveness. You have knowledge and biological resources we lack. Together, we might be able to establish sustainable safe zones, maybe even develop a treatment for early-stage infection." Over the next hours, we cautiously integrated Dr. Voss and her team into our research operation. Their technical knowledge complemented our botanical expertise, creating a synergy that accelerated our progress significantly. Using their equipment and our plant materials, we refined the formula for our inhibitory compound and developed more effective delivery methods. Within days, we had established a small-scale production facility for the compound, which we began distributing to survivor communities that Dr. Voss's team had identified. We also planted extensive fields of the most effective plant varieties, creating natural barriers against infected incursion. As our work progressed, I often thought about the path that had brought me here. My life's obsession with preserving agricultural heritage, once derided as backward-looking and irrelevant, had become the foundation for humanity's resistance against an existential threat. The ancient knowledge embedded in those seeds, accumulated over thousands of years of careful selection and stewardship, was proving more valuable than the most advanced genetic engineering. 1 month after the outbreak began, we stand at a critical juncture. The infected continue to evolve, but so do our countermeasures. We've established a network of safe zones protected by our plant-based defenses. We've developed early-stage treatments that can reverse the infection if caught quickly enough. And most importantly, we've preserved the seed diversity that represents our greatest adaptive resource in this changed world. I don't know if we'll ever fully reclaim what was lost. The world has been fundamentally altered by what humanity unleashed, but I do know that the path forward lies in working with nature rather than attempting to conquer it. The plants that have sustained human civilization since its beginning may well be what saves us from our own hubris. My grandmother was right all those years ago. Plants are patient. They've been here longer than us, and they'll be here long after we're gone. By learning their language, we've found a way to survive, and perhaps, in time, to thrive again in this transformed world.